And it's scrolling along. All right, I believe we are live. Okay, now I just need to figure out how to record on our. We are live. All right. You can hear me. That's weird. Okay. I want to go ahead and introduce. Oh, no, that hasn't happened to me before when we were doing this. Does anybody know how to help me here with my voice?
Sherry, you have to get out of Facebook because you're in both Facebook and.
Okay, thank you. So I have to close Facebook on my. Okay.
Also, there's a notation that we were viewing Betty Condren's screen.
Okay, how's that?
Oh, did you stop the recording or did you just exit out of it?
I exited out of Facebook and it says that we are live on Facebook.
Let me look.
But
yeah, go ahead and take a look and now we're recording again. So Steve, if you will show yourself here on our screen. We are so pleased to Steve Lech here tonight. He is really Riverside County's preeminent historian. If we don't count, well, he's all of Riverside County, and he is a native Riversider. He's been interested in the local history of Riverside County for 40 years. He's written 13 books on various topics related to the county, including Along the Old Roads, a history of the portion of Southern California that became Riverside County, 1772 to 1893. It's considered the definitive history of Riverside County. You may be more familiar with him from his weekly Back in the Day column in the Press Enterprise, where he explores many aspects of local history throughout Western Riverside County. He's been a docent at the Historic Mission Inn Hotel for over 30 years and is currently the chair of the City of Riverside's Cultural Heritage Board. I bet Steve knows a lot of secret spots in the Mission Inn. That would be really fun to know it that well. Steve, I'm still looking for you on my view.
Well, I'm here, but
Here you are.
the Betty Condren's screen is still up, so I can't share my screen.
Oh, Betty, for some reason your screen is being shared.
I'm having problems. Go ahead without me. Sorry.
Well, let me try this. Multiple. See if Steve that allows you to also share.
I can now.
Are
you seeing my screen?
No, I'm still seeing Betty's. Betty,
Well, I'm having problems. I'll just get off. Thank you anyway.
oh dear.
That might not work. That might not work. That might not work. She might take the screen with her.
Well, let's see if we can, if I can just say to stop screen sharing. And that will end that.
Right.
Okay, and now if I share screen again, and Steve, if you try to share, let's see, Betty, hang on, I think we're okay. Aha.
Are you seeing me now?
Yes. Yes, I think we have done it.
Okie doke.
Great.
Oh, all righty. Well, thanks much. I'm just going to minimize this so I can see the screen. Okay, this is our talk on the postcards from Mecca. This is about the California desert photography of these two ladies, Lula Mae Graves and, of course, Susie Keef Smith here. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm doing the presentation, but it's really based on the research by Ann Japenga and Warner Graves. And Warner is Lula Mae's grandson. And you may or may not know Ann. She is a writer out of Palm Springs, and she's done quite a bit of research on local history too in the desert. So anyways, but I was part of a project that culminated in the book called Postcards from Mecca. And so I'm going to take you through their life and then also show you a number of the pictures too. So let's see. Okay, I'm trying to, there we go. As many of you may know, one of the things I do as part of my research is I collect vintage postcards of Riverside County. I have over about 8,000 or so in the collection now. And I try as much as I can to try and figure out who some of these photographers are. Some of them are photo postcards like this. Many of them are not actually identified, but some of them mentioned, if you look down here, S.K. Smith. So because I like the desert scenery that this person was photographing, I thought I'd look him up. And unfortunately, of course, doing a search on somebody named Smith is a little difficult to say the least. But I was figuring that since this person was out in the desert quite a bit, and because the name was signed S.K. Smith, that it would be a guy. Well, I was proven wrong a little while later. And, okay. And the S.K. Smith turned out to be Susie Keef Smith. Now, if any of you know Bob Smith from the Idlewild Museum, they are cousins, distant cousins of some sort. And when I ran it by Bob, because I knew that he had done research on some of the photographers too, he said, yeah, that's Susie Keef Smith. We're distant, really. I think they're about second or third cousins. And anyway, at that point, he put me in touch with Ann Japenga. Now, I already knew her, but said that she was doing some research. And so we got together, along with Warner Graves and a few others, and set out on this project to kind of document her life and photography there. And it's a fascinating story that has one of those 1 in a million endings to it. And I'll get to that here in a little bit. Yeah. So anyways, who was Susie Smith? Well, my arrows are not working, so there we go. She was born in 1900 in LA, and you can see her here with her parents, James Smith and Nellie Keef. And she had a fairly normal life throughout LA and the like, but she really had a penchant for being outdoors and exploring and the like. She really did not like being cooped up in school. And in addition to that, she and her mother never got along. The two of them were constantly at it. And so she just preferred to be outside, and she hated being cooped up in school. So in fact, she said when she was about 8 or 10, she said, I love to be out of doors playing and hated to be shut up in school. I want the wide open spaces. So by age 11, she was pretty fed up with school. And she wrote later, she said, I asked God to make something happen. 2 weeks later, I had polio, and my prayer was answered. I did not go to school for a year. And so Susie comes down with polio, which of course was fairly common at that time there. So she's out of school for a year. And during this time, it was thought that Susie would never walk again. She had a fairly hard case of it and the like. But after a lot of therapy, about 4 surgeries and the like, she went from being in bed to a wheelchair, as we see her here, to walking with crutches. And finally, she was able to go and have a leg brace put on, and she was able to walk again. Now, for those of you who may remember the days of polio, you may remember those long, thick iron leg braces that people wore. Susie had one on her leg, on her right leg, for the rest of her life. Here. And so this is a shot of her at about 13 years. She's recovered from the disease, but of course, this was during the time that she was doing her rehab and the like. So anyway, Susie is growing up at this point, and because it was thought that she would not ever walk again, an uncle gave her a camera as a present, thinking that maybe she would have something to do. And she really loved having the camera there. And so that would become an important part of her life too, as the years wore on, because things were about to change for the family. In 1916, her father decides that he's going to move the family out to the desert. He wants to engage in farming. There's not a lot of room to do that in LA, as you can imagine. And so he starts getting all the different land brochures and the like, and he eventually ends up purchasing a section here. This is Mecca. Give you an idea where we are. This is the southern Coachella Valley. Here's the Salton Sea, the very northern tip of it. And here is the land that they got. And it's 160 acres, which they call the Triangle Ranch there. I think I have a shot of it. Yeah, this is what it looks like today. Of course, today it's in row crops, but back then they were raising mainly dates and citrus. And even then, dates were very much an experimental crop. So he was helping out the experimental people experimenting with dates and like. So you got to think, well, why in the world would they go to Mecca, of all places? And as it turns out, you know, we think of Mecca today as basically just a wide spot in the road, home to a lot of agricultural workers and the like. But at this time, Mecca was really the hub of the southern Coachella Valley. It was one of the main train stations, because starting back in the 1880s when the railroad had come through and the area was called Walters, the Southern Pacific had found a great artesian supply of water, which of course the steam locomotives needed and all. And so Mecca became an inland hub. And this is where people who were all throughout the eastern desert area would come to get supplies, get their mail, mail things, ship things, and the like. So there was a fair amount of traffic coming through Mecca from the desert. Prospectors, miners, people who were just homesteading and the like. So a lot of people coming through there. Then that's why, or that's one of the reasons why they came to Mecca. Mecca had a hotel here. This is the Caravansary Hotel. It was right on the railroad. Railroad would be back over here too. And let me get it also had a post office. In fact, it is still touted, I believe it's still touted as the lowest post office in the country, because it's at like minus 200 feet or so in elevation. During these intervening years, of course, Susie regained a lot of her strength. She went to Coachella Valley High School. She went to boarding school afterwards. She dreamed of going to college, but that didn't work out because of finances. And so she worked at a few odd jobs, but in 1926, her father suggested that she apply to be the postmaster at Mecca. And she did. There were 3 applicants. There were 2 men and her, and she actually beat out the other 2 men and was named the postmaster here at Mecca in 1926. So, of course, with that, she has access to a lot of people, and she hears news and she hears all kinds of things. And while she's doing this, too, while she's the postmaster at Mecca, she's also going out exploring. She loves the desert. She loves being down there. And anytime that she can, she packs her bags and she takes off into the Coachella Valley, down into Anza Borrego, over into the Shaver Valley, the Chuckwalla Valley, into the Orocopia Mountains, kind of all over the place, just exploring. And she kind of identifies with this persona. Here, let me show you. First of all, this is her office in the Mecca post office. And those literally are post office boxes there. Here's her front desk there. But also at this post office, this was kind of a way station, and she sold magazines, postcards, and all kinds of things to the traveling public, because she was just pretty much about even with the train station. So if you got off the train station, you were pretty much looking there at the post office. And she started identifying with a lot of these people. Notice all these different places. She's got action novels, Western adventures, adventure things, railroad stories, and all. And so she really kind of starts to identify with this, and she kind of takes on this persona. And at the same time, of course, she is taking all kinds of pictures as she goes on her hikes and on her explorations. And this was, of course, the golden age of postcards. From basically the teens through probably the post-war era, this was the golden age of postcards. And we call it that because there were a lot of innovations with postcards, but also this was a cheap and easy way for people to communicate and at the same time advertise different areas. Because of course you'd write to your loved ones back east or what have you, but a lot of the postcards were showing areas that were completely foreign to people who grew up on the East Coast. I mean, imagine getting a shot like this. And this is basically, this is the start of of Mount San Jacinto here. Palm Springs would be down here, and we're basically up in the Devil's Garden looking to the southwest, southeast. Imagine getting a postcard like this when you've spent your life in upstate New York, Boston, something like that. This is going to be completely different. And so not only is it a way of communicating, but it's a way of advertising. So maybe you think, you know what, maybe I ought to try being out there instead of here shoveling snow when it's minus 10 degrees in Boston or Cincinnati, or what have you. So the thing of it is, though, during this golden age of postcards, most of them look like this. This is a Kurt Teich example. He was probably the biggest postcard producer during this time. He was out of Chicago. And it involved taking pictures of scenes and then having them very heavily tinted so that they almost appear to be cartoonish to us. So what was happening with a number of people was they were starting to produce what were called real photo postcards. And out in the desert, probably the biggest one, or at least the most well-known one, was Stephen Willard. Stephen Willard was a rather famous photographer of this time. He was in Corona for a while, moved out to Palm Springs for several years, and then got kind of disenchanted with the desert and moved up to the Mammoth Lakes area later on. But he would take hundreds and hundreds of pictures here that were converted into postcards. And when we say converted into postcards, basically a postcard is about a 3x5 example. Back then, a number of cameras took pictures, took negatives that were 3x5, and you could literally go to a photographic lab and have them printed onto postcard stock. so that a number of these could just be done as postcards, and voila, you'd have some to sell. So Stephen Willard did it. In our area, Burton Fraser did too. He's probably the most prolific in this area. He was out of Pomona and did all kinds of things throughout the Southwest and Southern California here. This is a shot, give you an idea. You can barely see the Salton Sea down here. Here would be Mecca, Coachella, and Indio, looking from basically the Joshua Tree National Monument here. And then also, there was a gentleman named Dewey Moore who did a very few of them too. And Dewey Moore was a meteorologist who came out here and worked at the 8 experimental station in Mecca. And you see his moniker here says photo by D. Moore. And so into this fray came Susie. And she decided that she would make her own too. And she, of course, put her moniker on them, S.K. Smith. And this was one of her typical ones here. This is a lonely desert trail near Valerie Jean's. So it's probably out closer to like East Mecca there. And she started doing this also. She would take pictures. She would take the ones that she liked and send them to San Diego to be processed and then get them back. And then she put them into spinners all along the railroads. As far as we can tell, her pictures were being shown and sold from Beaumont all the way down to Yuma and all points in between. And of course, in the post office too. Then. So as she made more and more of them, she actually started up her own line, if you will. We have one of her sample books where you could flip through. Notice there's a number down here. And you could order prints of X or Y or Z and have them in your spinner. So anyways, she would do this for a number of years while she was out doing her explorations. Here is her business card. As you can see, photographic postcards and photographic studies of California desert scenes, because that's what she really loved there. Okay, so she's set up as the postmaster, and she's also doing her photography work. And at this time, Lula May joins Susie, and Lula May is her cousin. They are first cousins. Their respective mothers are sisters. And Lula May is in Tennessee, and she has pretty much the same relationship with her mother that Susie does. That is, she hates it. And so Susie writes to her, says what a wonderful time she's having, and Lula May just decides, oh, I've got to do that. So she hops on a train by herself and comes out here. And she writes that while she's on the train, all by herself coming out here, no one would talk to her because that is not something that a lone woman does, is travel by herself. And so literally she spoke to no one on the trip out here. But she really became enthralled with what Susie was doing and the time. And so this is a picture of Lula May when she gets off the train. The train pulls out, they go into the desert, she takes a picture, and voila, there she is. And literally a week later, she has donned all the rough and ready cowboy clothes, the boots, the hat, and she is part of the scene here. And so she just kind of gets into this also. And so the two of them now start going out on these adventures too by themselves. So here is a shot of them at Corn Springs. They've set up camp here between some palm trees. If you don't know Corn Springs, it is just a few miles southeast of Desert Center. There's actually a public campground there and you can still get spring water from there too. It's a neat little place. Here's Lula May in the back of their Model T truck. There's an interesting story about this because, you know, as I said, Susie really did not get along with her mother. And so that's one of the reasons she enjoyed her little jaunts. Well, she'd usually take her horse or her mule, but eventually she wanted to start taking the Model T truck. Well, her father was a little worried about her know-how in mechanics, so he took her out to the back 40 one day and took the truck apart and told her to put it back together. And when she got it back together and got it running, that she could take it with her. Well, not only did she get it back together, but it fired up the first time. And so from that point on, then Susie and Lula May also used their Model T truck here, which they had for many years. Okay, so let's look at some of the photographs that they were taking during this time. Some of them are just regular pictures of the two of them. Some of them are photo postcards here, like this one, of course. Here is Susie in the middle and Lula May. Lula May was some of the desert verbena here. And there are several shots in the collection of them holding snakes. That seemed to be the thing that you did back then. Here she is at one of the signposts. This is what the AAA used to do, especially out here in the desert. They'd go and put signposts at various roadsides because a lot of times you didn't know where you were, and that was quite dangerous at the time. So there they are. I mentioned that they had that camp there at Corn Springs. Eventually, one of the miners gave them this cabin here at Corn Springs that they kind of used as their headquarters, and they were able to kind of radiate out from there on day trips and maybe even overnight trips too. So they get farther into the desert. From here, you'd have access to Fort Dry Lake and the Palin Mountains and all kinds of places from there. And so here's her cabin. You can see it's dated 1929. Here. This was not necessarily an uncommon occurrence here with seeing the skeleton here. This might have been some hapless miner. It may have been somebody who decided to strike out into the desert on his own without being prepared, or any number of things. But this was something that you would come across potentially. And maybe not actually in this good a shape because they may have been gnawed on the bones. And so anyways, this was one of her warning to others there. This is Cottonwood Springs Road. This is actually a paved road now going up into Joshua Tree National Monument, which is all this up here. You can take this off of the 10 freeway and just head on up into the southern entrance to Joshua Tree. There. So this is set in 1930. There. As you can see, it's just two ruts in the sand at that time. And then here's an old log cabin in Whitewater Canyon near Coachella Valley. She just loved taking pictures of kind of lots of different things that she saw. And who knows, this is probably a miner's cabin or a prospector's cabin. And at that time, these things would have been open, and if you needed to, you could stay there and then move on. So here's her post office again. And this is her office was in there, and then her sales stuff was over here and the like. But again, this was sort of the pivotal point that a lot of society rotated around in the eastern desert area of the county at this time. She would have all kinds of people coming through, and this is what I meant when she said she had access to a lot of people. She would get all kinds of stories about places and adventures that they'd been on. This is a typical prospector wagon. He's got his mules here, bedroll in here. This guy was probably out prospecting, would come into town, get some supplies maybe cash in some of his gold if he made any, which of course most of them didn't. But lots of people would just be coming through in this fashion. When the Colorado River Aqueduct was being built through the desert in the early 30s, which was one of the major construction projects here in Riverside County during the early years of the Depression, Susie and Lula May were on it, and they followed some of the construction, photo documented a lot of it here. This is the Utah construction camp. This would be by, if you've been out on the 10 in the Shaver Valley, just past Chiriaco Summit, you may have seen those large pipes that go into the mountains to the north. This would be near that. But you get into camp there and they take pictures. Here's one of the cook crew there who would be making meals for the workers there. And then here's some of the machinery that would have been used to pull dirt and other materials out of the mountains as they pushed through them. And so she was out here documenting a lot of this too. Here's the day shift. These guys look like they've put in a day or two already. And then there were more prospectors too. And notice how she's titled this Trailbreakers of the West, near the trading post in the Coachella Valley here. Here's the old guy. He's got what, 4 mules and an old wagon in here, but he's out hoping to strike it rich. Yeah. Just like this guy, going through what I think is probably Box Canyon, which is the eastern highway out of Mecca. There. It was not uncommon to see people like this at this time. So their picture, here's another one. There's gold in them, Nar Hills, of course, the proverbial phrase there. But there they are with even more burros. And she gets some humorous ones too. Here's, give me my boots and saddle. The little boy's got his little donkey here in the Coachella Valley, of course. And then she would do a lot of scenery ones too, to kind of show off the scenery of the desert and the way that it looked at the time. But the thing with Susie is that she would go to places that were really off the beaten path. Some of these places can take you quite a while to get to. They weren't the shots that you get from the highway, like a lot of what the Fraser photos were. This is Hidden Palms. This is about a 2-mile hike from Box Canyon Road to the south. There is a trail that goes there, but it's not something you're necessarily going to drive right up to. This is the Sidewinder Canyon near it. Of course, back then you could drive to it, but not necessarily anymore. Yeah. And here's a shot of Dos Palmas, the major oasis in the eastern Coachella Valley. This was used for thousands of years as a watering hole, and was even in this time too. And then, of course, the Salton Sea, which you see down here, looking towards the Santa Rosa Mountains over here from the east slope. There. And then here are smoke trees within Box Canyon. Again, showing off the scenery of the desert, as it were. And of course, probably the most popular of hers and many other pictures are of Tencento here. That tends to be one that we've got literally dozens and dozens of postcards from many different people. This would be taken from kind of the southern edge of Desert Hot Springs looking south. This is all covered with windmills now. Here we are at Thousand Palms, the oasis, right along the fault line in the Indio Hills. A couple of her shots. And then here we are going up Palm Canyon. And actually this looks almost exactly like it does today, with the exception of the road being paved. But you can drive into Palm Canyon here and go hiking after you pay the fee to the on the reservation. The commercial ones. Here's the date palm in full bearing in the Coachella Valley, because of course people were enamored with the dates, and this is pretty much where all of them came from in the United States. So it would be something very unique to show off. And there's a couple of places. This is a black tent in Indio. This seems to be like a roadside fruit and souvenir stand, for lack of a better term. We've got writings on the walls. This is some of the Native American petroglyphs here near the sides of the hills, especially over by the fish traps. And then here's an Oya and basket that she found too. And she'd take pictures of these to show others. And then this would have been an important one too, showing flowers in the desert. And people think that it's just nothing but a huge wave of sand from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, to show people that the desert actually does bloom, would be a big thing there. And then, of course, the beauty in the desert too, the cloud at sunset over the Coachella Valley, and the cloud at sunset in the Salton Sea too. Well, this lasted for only a few years. Lula May left in 1931 when she married Warner Graves, who I believe was one of the survey crew members there on the aqueduct. And they moved to Los Angeles, there where they raised a small family. But he died in the early 50s, and she moved to San Jacinto, where she had a house with just chock full of all kinds of Indian blankets, baskets, all kinds of prized possessions from her times out in the desert. Because, even though she lived in LA, she was out in the desert quite a bit, exploring and all. She died in 2008 at almost 100 years of age. There. And Warner talks about how she was just enamored with all things, and that her house was just almost like a museum in and of itself then. Susie's story, however, is less than stellar. In 1935, she elopes with George Fry, who I don't know if you saw on her business card. There was her manager for her business, and they go to Mexico and get married, and then come back here and live throughout the desert in various places in the late 30s and 40s. The 1940 census shows her in Amboy, up in San Bernardino County and the like. But he dies early, and Susie begins to have additional health problems. One of the things that polio patients cannot stand later in life is the heat. And so even though she loved the desert, she actually moved to Leucadia near Encinitas and spent the rest of her life there. Doesn't mean she didn't go to the desert, but she just could not stay there long term, especially in the summer then. She spent a lot of the rest of her life doing missionary work in Mexico and all. But in 1988, she died. And of course, she had no family, no heirs, no nothing. And the San Diego County controller took over her estate then. She spent the last few months in a home. But after she died, of course, then the controller came in and sold most of her things to pay off her expenses. Well, at this point, the story becomes even more gruesome, if you will, because most of her photographs and negatives and the like were thrown out at this time. But luckily, they were thrown out. The office that they worked in was also had the office of an archaeologist named Ron May. And he had some ins with the controller's office. Some of them had said, if we get something that looks kind of interesting, we'll let you know. And so into Ron's office one day walks a woman carrying a large, or I should say dragging a large plastic trash bag full of photo albums, and says, you think these that might be anything? And of course, he's digging through them and they've got stuff all over him. And he says, yeah, well, you better get outside. Then there are 2 more bags like this out in the dumpster. So he literally goes in, jumps in the dumpster, pulls these things out. They're covered in who knows what, grease and peanut butter and all that, and saves them for a while. He figured they were something, but he didn't do too much with them until Anne Japenga, who was working on Susie's story and had met and entered into a partnership with Warner Graves, who had all of Lula May's stuff. She and Ron got together, and Ron actually had most of Susie Smith's archive. So together, then they were able to piece together a lot of the story. And we also have her photographs to a large degree still intact. Then we've since learned just very recently that there's a woman up north somewhere who bought another one of Susie's picture books at a swap meet somewhere. But those tend to have like her early childhood pictures. Some of the ones I showed you at the beginning of the talk there were for hers. But anyway, we now have a fairly complete record of their collection, which is fantastic because many of these scenes obviously don't exist anymore. Now, most of them are in the archives at the Mojave Desert Museum out there in Goffs. And so they are accessible to be used. So anyway, this, a number of us came together, Ron, myself, obviously Anne, Warner, and all that. We came together to produce this book called Postcards from Mecca. And it gives the life of Susie and Lula May. It gives Ron's version of the story about rescuing the stuff literally from the dumpster. My chapter is one that compares her work to the others that I mentioned, Stephen Willard, Burton Fraser, Dewey Moore, and all. And so that is available through the museum. I think it's available in several museums. I've got a number of copies. Of course, it's on Amazon too. And as a coda to this story too, and I don't usually make a pitch afterwards, but of course, Susie died in the hands of the controller, and so they did not do anything for her grave marker, and Warner has now set up a fund here to get her a grave marker. This is her grave in Oceanside here. And so if you're interested, this is the address, but you can go to GoFundMe and put in Susie Keef Smith, and he's raising money now to get her a grave marker so that she can be recognized and have her photo on there too. So anyways, that is what I have for you tonight. And so I will go ahead and open my thing back up, and I will give Sherry back the host ship, and then I'll open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. I have several questions, so I'm gonna get us started. For those 2 young women at that time, you mentioned that Lula May coming out of the train that by herself, that wasn't quite appropriate. I'm fascinated with these 2 young women doing this work at that point, and what you might say about how unusual that was or what that meant.
It was quite unusual. Yeah, it was quite unusual at that time. Just going out in the desert was not for everyone to begin with. Especially, they'd be gone for several days, a week or so, something like that. So you had to know your way around. She always had a .38, either strapped to her hip or on her counter there at the Mecca post office. And from what I understand, knew how to use it very well in case she ever got into trouble. There's no indication that they ever did then, but obviously being out there alone, you could be inviting some, for lack of a better term. So, but it was quite unusual. And like I said, when I started doing my research into it, I was looking for a guy. Women did not sign their name S.K. Smith. That's how a man usually did it, especially in the newspapers and all that. So I figured I was looking for a man, and I'm glad I stumbled upon Bob Smith, who told me that it was Susie Smith, because like I said, looking for anybody named Smith, let alone any specific one, is tough. So,
Yeah, that's something. One other comment was I noticed on the AAA map that you showed of the roads toward the beginning of the presentation, and it said marked in crayon. The blue meant the road was paved, and the red that it wasn't. And it says marked in crayon, which I thought was.
yeah,
So,
those were the typical maps that you would get in the teens and 20s before they started the paper maps, the more like the road maps that we're used to. You would get those, and they're fascinating.
yeah.
To see.
Yes. Other questions from the group for Steve? Go ahead and you'll have to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Steve, I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Steve Shane here from from actually Chula Vista. And I'm with the South Bay Historical Society. And I'm writing a book on the history of the Eagle Mountain Mine, which is just north of Desert Center.
Right.
You have pictures of Desert Center?
Not
Postcards?
her pictures. I do, yes. I have several.
She didn't get over there to take those pictures in the early days.
No, I have several of Desert Center and Eagle Mountain, but not hers.
Okay.